You are officially invited. Yes, you. You're invited to join us in Fertility Awareness Mastery. This is my 10-week program designed to help you gain confidence using fertility awareness. Whether you're actively avoiding pregnancy or looking to optimize your cycles for conception, we have a spot for you. We start on April 23rd. Are you ready to jump in? Head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program to reserve your spot today. That's fertilityfriday.com/group program. This episode is brought to you by my very first book, The Fifth Vital Sign: Master Your Cycles and Optimize Your Fertility. With over 1,000 research citations, it is the most comprehensive resource on fertility awareness and the menstrual cycle to date. The Fifth Vital Sign is available for purchase on Amazon in ebook and paperback formats. Audio is coming. And you can grab the first chapter for free over at fertilityfriday.com/vital sign. That's fertilityfriday.com/vital sign. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 248. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 249. Welcome to the 249th episode of the Fertility Friday podcast. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Lisa from fertilityfriday.com, and this is your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. In today's episode, I'm sharing my interview with Angie, who shares her experience using the copper IUD. And if you've been listening to the podcast recently, you'll remember that a couple of episodes ago, I interviewed two women who shared their experiences with the copper IUD. And essentially in both stories, they did experience certain side effects that led them eventually to, not using it anymore. And this episode is a bit different because Angie didn't really have a lot of really negative side effects throughout her use, but she did unexpectedly become pregnant. And so in today's episode, she shares her story and her experience and also some of the insights that she gleaned. And from having this experience, and I suppose some of what you can take from it. So if you've used the copper IUD before, or if you've thought about using it, just her take on some of the things to watch for and, just some of the information that could have helped her in this situation that she found herself in. And before we jump into today's episode, just a reminder that registration is open for my upcoming 10-week Fertility Awareness Mastery Group program. I would love to have you in there if you are in that zone of wanting to use fertility awareness as your primary method of birth control. If you are planning ahead for pregnancy and wanting to make sure to optimize your chances of conceiving and wanting to do everything you can to optimize your menstrual cycle health. In an ideal situation, before you even start trying to have a baby, you would want to have 3 menstrual cycles back to back that all fall within the normal parameters. And so charting your cycles is a really, incredible opportunity to get a sense of what is happening in your cycles. Is there anything off balance that we need to look at? And to give yourself the opportunity and the time to really be able to address those things. And so all of those wonderful goals are things that you can achieve within this 10-week program. That's why we're here. And not only can you do that, but you're doing it alongside other women who have the same goals and intentions and are just as interested and excited to chart their cycles as you are. So for more information, make sure to head over to fertilityfriday.com/group program. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/group program. And without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Angie. And today I'm excited to be here with Angie. Angie is a member of the Fertility Friday community. And I'm often posting just kind of random thoughts and questions to spark discussion. And it was a while ago, but I posted something in there about the IUD and just asking if anyone had had experience with it, whether it's positive or negative. And Angie, you chimed in with your experience, which was particularly, it just really stood out to me. So I reached out to you and asked if you wanted to come on the podcast and share it. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, I'm excited to share my story with other women. You never know if there's other people that have gone through the same thing. And in my experience, I haven't found that many, but it's like we were talking about, it's about informed consent. So the more you know about all your options, the better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the narrative about hormonal birth control is largely kind of, it's like the doctors and kind of the men that are largely making the narrative about hormonal birth control. And so what I like about having this type of medium is that we can really give our experiences as women. And I mean, every woman is going to have a different experience, but I think it's really important just to have that space to say, actually, this is what I had. This is what happened to me when I took it. Just so you know.
And it's super exciting for me. I mean, I'm 26 right now, and so like kind of in the middle of my reproductive years, and it's really exciting for me to have discovered fertility awareness and just everything about my body at such a time in society where it's becoming closer to mainstream, and women are just willing to communicate more about everything about their bodies. So I'm really excited about that.
Mm-hmm. I love that, and I mean, so nice to be able to discover this in your mid-20s, because I know there's a lot of women who, they discover fertility awareness and charting and all of this stuff in their late 30s and 40s. And what I hear the most is, oh man, I wish I would have known this 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I'm just kind of like, and I think there might be a little bit of a delay, but let's just jump right in. Maybe share with us a little bit about your own history with maybe when you had your period and how you were managing your fertility, and kind of take us through essentially what we were just talking about, which is when you kind of discovered fertility awareness. And so, yeah, kind of take us on a journey of what it's been like for you.
Sure. So I'd probably have to jump kind of way back, but the first thing I think about is just growing up. I think I had the typical disconnected relationship with my body that I think most girls have in our society. I mean, my friends and I had a code word for when we got our period, like couldn't even really say it, and I didn't realize how my cycle was such an important facet of my health. I didn't even really think of it as a cycle. It was just, I had to bleed for a few days each month. And even in college, I had no idea why some days I had a lot of stretchy, clear fluid. I didn't realize that it's not normal to lose your period. They obviously don't teach you about some of the most important processes in our bodies in public school. And so I was just another product of the system, I guess. So in college, I think I had just turned 21, and I had been hearing more about different types of birth control, specifically IUDs, intrauterine devices. I figured I might as well take advantage of my parents' good insurance while I had it. And yeah, so I knew that for me, I just for some reason was never open to having artificial hormones in my body. I don't know where that came from. If I had some weird hippiness given through my parents, but yeah, so pretty much at that point, the Paragard really stood out to me, the copper IUD. So it's thought to work. They don't know for sure, which is why I say that, but it is thought to work by being copper. It's supposed to be toxic to sperm. And then the placement of the Paragard IUD in your cervix is supposed to prevent sperm from being able to go up and fertilize an egg. So it sounded appealing to me to not have to worry about messing with my hormones or introducing artificial hormones. So yeah, I made an appointment at a Planned Parenthood to get it inserted. Insertion was pretty easy for me, actually. I have a good pain tolerance and it didn't really bother me. But before Paragard, I had never had any cramps or heavy periods. And then for all the years that I did have Paragard, I actually had pretty painful cramps and heavier bleeding. There were a handful of day ones of my cycle that kind of left me lying on the ground breathing through cramps. But since, I was told this was normal, and I figured it's better than pumping artificial hormones through my body. So I just kind of took it as like this is the price you pay for long-term birth control. The Paragard can last up to 12 years for birth control. And I figured it would be great to have a one and done, like by 12 years, I'd be ready to have kids, take it out and never have to worry about it. So yeah, during the 3 or 4 years that I had Paragard, I experienced other things about my reproductive system. I actually donated eggs. I lost my period for about a year due to like over-exercise and not getting enough nutrients. So it's kind of like all these things they're very connected, but they're stories for another day. But it definitely added to kind of my awareness that I have now in the story. So yeah, I stopped having periods when I moved back. I was living in Utah with my fiance, and I needed to go back to Boston to finish a semester of school. So obviously that was annoying to have to go back and be long distance. And so I think part of it was stress, but I think the bigger part was over exercising and just really not understanding important facets of women's health and that I wasn't taught. So, I mean, it's not really my fault, but essentially I had all the points of the female athlete triad, and I developed hypothalamic amenorrhea. So I just stopped ovulating, stopped having periods. And I actually went to a gynecologist right after missing 2 or 3 cycles, and she totally brushed it off, said it was totally fine. So of course I didn't worry about it. During this time too, nothing was wrong with the Paragard. Everything was fine. So I finished college. I moved back to Utah. I got married that summer. we soon adopted a puppy that fall. And after about just a week of raising our puppy, I realized that I just couldn't keep up, like over exercising. And I had sort of orthorexic eating tendencies. And I just didn't have the energy to continue those habits while trying to take care of a puppy. And I also started to notice like my health habits that I thought were healthy were making me anxious. And I had just started picking up some things about women's health that made me really wonder what was going on in my body. So I kind of threw myself into single-handedly healing myself. And within just a couple months, I actually got my period back on my own. And I just felt immensely better physically, mentally. My body just jumped right back into having regular cycles. So about 4 cycles after getting my period back, I think I had what I thought was an entirely normal period, which in retrospect is really confusing, as you'll see. It seemed there was nothing to show that it was not a normal period for me. It was February of 2017. I had a lot of exciting stuff coming up. And about a week and a half after the start of that, what I thought was my cycle, I started getting really intermittent pains in my pelvic area. They seemed very centralized, and they were short and brief, but they were stabbing. And I started noticing when I would use the bathroom, I would notice small bits of blood. And so it just looked like a little bit of spotting. It wasn't like too much. It definitely wasn't a period. And I smirk now about how naive I was. But at the time, I brushed off those symptoms as weird women stuff. When really now I know that this weird women stuff is really a body's way of communicating with you. And I simply thought that my body was just readjusting after not having periods for a while, because like, this is what they tell you. If your period can be totally irregular, and that's just normal.
And all this time you had the copper IUD inserted all this time.
Yeah. And the only problem I had with it was cramps and heavier bleeding, but it really didn't bother me enough. Like, I kind of evangelized it. I was like, everybody should have this. It's non-hormonal. You don't have to worry about taking a pill at the same time every day. So, I mean, I really thought it was the best option for me. And maybe it was at that time.
Mm-hmm. And when your period, so your period stopped and everything, and that was like still while you were on it. And so you had that, I shouldn't say on it because it was inserted. So you had the IUD inserted, you were having periods, then your period stopped. Your OB told you that it was totally fine. You made all these changes, your periods came back, and all this time you had the IUD inserted.
Yeah. I donated eggs while I still had my IUD inside. Since it was non-hormonal, it didn't affect the donation process. So yeah, I did all these things, and there was never a problem. It was always in the right place. I couldn't ever feel the strings, which is, I think it was just the position of my cervix. So that was a little bit frustrating, because usually people can feel the strings to make sure it's in place, but mine was still always in place. There was actually never anything wrong with it.
Mm-hmm. And then you started having, or you had this period that you thought was normal, and then it became a little bit strange. And then you had a little bit of kind of irregular bleeding after. And you mentioned that you had some cramping.
Yeah. And I think it started on about maybe a Tuesday or Wednesday. And it was just maybe a few times a day. It would just come and go. Like, it would never last more than like 10 to 20 seconds, but it was a really stabbing, sharp thing in my abdomen. And I just didn't question it. I mean, I was wondering like, what is this? But I just figured my body's getting back to normal. I'm not going to worry about it. And I was also very like, go back then. So it's like, I don't have time to worry about this. But yeah, so they were pretty intense, strange cramps that would last for a bit. And yeah, noticing bleeding when I assumed that it was a UTI. So I had never had a UTI before, but I had had plenty of friends tell me how horrific they are. And I was like, oh, I'm having pain and I'm finding blood in my urine. I thought it was blood in my urine, when really that was just when I would notice the blood. So I was like, oh, I have a UTI. So I guess I don't like the idea of going on antibiotics, but that's the only thing I knew that could help a UTI. So I went to a health clinic. I think it was like Saturday afternoon. The pain was just increasing, becoming more frequent, and getting pretty, like, at times it would be unbearable for those like 20 seconds that it would last. It just felt like a knife. And so I went to a health clinic that Saturday afternoon. So maybe 4 or 5 days after the pain started. They saw me fairly quickly. They asked for a urine sample right away, because my chief complaint was a possible UTI. So they took my urine. I guess they didn't check for pregnancy. I know they didn't, but they took my urine, and I waited in the room for the doctor. It was a male doctor. My urine test came back totally clear. So I did not have a UTI. They were positive of that. And the male doctor came in the room and told me that I had urethritis, so inflammation of the urethra. And it's one of those things that can be caused by anything. So he basically said, like, you'll just take this medication. It'll basically tamper down the inflammation, get rid of the pain pretty quickly, and just give it a few days and your urethra will go back to normal. So I went over to the pharmacy, and oh man, one of the darkest memories was driving from the clinic to the pharmacy to pick up the prescription, because there were some red lights. And I remember at the first red lights, I was like yelling at the red lights, like, please turn green. I'm in so much pain, because it was getting more frequent. And by like those last few intersections, I was like crying and like begging those lights to change to green, because I needed that medication to stop the pain. And I didn't question like that. I just figured an inflamed urethra could be that bad. I don't know. Yeah. So since the pain had been kind of ebbing and flowing, it happened to ease up a little bit after I took the medication, which was just a coincidence. The medication obviously did nothing for me since I didn't have an inflamed urethra. So that was that afternoon, and that evening, the pain was it's continued to come and go. And I was in the living room with my husband, and it was probably 9:00 p.m. And I just realized I don't think I'll be able to fall asleep tonight with this pain. And it just started getting really downhill from there. I started vomiting from pain. I was like just lying on the ground. It was all I could think about. And like I said, I have a high pain tolerance. So this was really kind of startling for my husband. And he looked up a different urgent care and noticed that it closed in about half an hour. So he's like, we just get a rush to this one, because if you're not going to sleep, like, this could get worse. And neither of us thought it could be anything. So yeah, in the car ride, I was just in pain, not like vomiting again. He finally got me to the second urgent care. And by then the pain had kind of ebbed away again. So I kind of felt like I was like, this is just an irritated urethra. Why am I being such a wimp about this? So the nurses did pretty much everything that the first clinic had done earlier that day. And they asked me if the other clinic had given me a pregnancy test. And I said I didn't know, but they did take a urine sample. So they asked for another sample. So I gave it to them. In a few minutes more of waiting, they came in and told me that I was pregnant. And I immediately was like, okay, but I'm not. I have the Paragard, and false positives happen all the time. So like, you should check again. And the nurse was very gentle about it. And he told me that the pills that I had taken for the inflamed urethra would not have caused a false positive, and that the pregnancy test that they used was very accurate. And I just continued to deny it. I was like, it's not possible. I have the Paragard. I'm just not pregnant. And he was like, no, you need to go to the emergency room right now for a blood test and an ultrasound. And that the other nurse was already calling the ER to say that we were on our way. And I was like, well, I guess I don't have the choice now. So, oh man. And then the nurse like gave me the pregnancy test stick as if I wanted to keep it. And I was like, what do I do with this? It was just a surreal experience. So yeah, my husband drove me across the street to the ER, and the waiting room was pretty full, but they saw me immediately, which it impressed me and worried me at the same time. They took my vitals right out in the lobby. They were asking about my pain. And it's funny because like I was at a 9, and I've never felt anything. So I was like, I want to say 10, but there's gotta be something worse. And the pain started increasing again. So they went through the whole examination, asking me a lot of questions. They were like, so you're probably pregnant. And I was like, but it was probably false. They were like, well, we're going to do it again. And they just gave me the blood test, hooked me up to some morphine. And it was definite by then that I was indeed pregnant. And after hours of waiting, they finally gave an ultrasound that confirmed that the pregnancy was not in my uterus. So it was in one of my right fallopian tube. Oh, wow. And the Paragard was still totally in place. It's just that that teeny little percentage, one of the side effects that they call. Yeah, it's like it's less than it's something like a 0.1%, 0.2% chance that you can have an ectopic pregnancy on Paragard. But I became a statistic at that point. And it's not that it's not that any IUD causes an ectopic pregnancy, but in the ridiculously tiny likelihood that the IUD fails to prevent a pregnancy, there is a higher risk of it being ectopic, because I guess I don't know. I can't go really into the science, but I was just really frustrated at that point, because I had chosen like what is the most effective form of birth control. It had the teeniest % of failure. It's sure they tell you some side effects, but they kind of just quickly tell you them. And like, oh yeah, you might get heavier bleeding and cramps, but it should regulate itself within a few months. And like, yeah, you could die, but not really.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at that point, I mean, it's after midnight and it's just me and my husband in the ER. And I had a private room, but they were basically waiting for an on-call OBGYN to come in and decide what to do. I talked to a doctor. I don't think it was an OBGYN, but in the ER, she told me that with how early they suspected the pregnancy was, that I could take methotrexate, which is a chemotherapy drug to stop the pregnancy, and that I'd be able to go home and go back to normal life within 2 or 3 days. So she was assuming that it would probably be a medication, but she wanted the specialist to come in to confirm. So I kept waiting, and it was about 3 a.m. at this time. And this, I just remember him being a really old man, and he had bifocals. And I was like, wait, he's going to do surgery on me with bifocals? Just a little bit judgmental. But yeah, he told me that he really just cut to the chase and told me that I needed surgery like as soon as possible, like right now at 3 a.m. And that even though my pregnancy hormones were low and the pregnancy was so early, I had enough internal bleeding that emergency surgery was the only option for me. Because if you have a fallopian tube rupture, it can lead to a lot of hemorrhaging and kill you. It turns out that they didn't know at the time, but my fallopian tube had already ruptured. So yeah, I was, up until that point, I was kind of like just relaxed and joking. And then once he was like, you're going into surgery right now, that's when I started to get like, whoa. I had never had any anesthesia. I had never had surgery. It was just surreal. I felt like I was dreaming. But yeah, he told me the surgery would be laparoscopic, and he wouldn't know how much tissue they would have to remove until they were already in there. So the best case scenario would be that they would remove the mass and the blood. And the worst case scenario would be removing my entire fallopian tube. So it was kind of strange being put under, knowing not how much of my body I would have waking up, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. But other than that, I stayed pretty calm. I kissed my husband goodbye and they wheeled me out. And I mean, the whole being in the operating room was just surreal too, because the doctors don't like jokes. I know all the nurses were like laughing at my jokes and it was really fun, but the doctors seemed like they were just like deadpan whenever I would make a joke. It was kind of funny, but they put me under, so I was under entire anesthesia. And when I came to, I was just in a big empty ward, and a nurse noticed that I woke up and came over and greeted me. And she told me right away that they had to remove the entire tube and that there was a lot of blood in there. There was about a unit of blood that I lost. And it was really shocking to wake up and immediately be told that they took my entire fallopian tube at my right one. And thankfully there was nothing else wrong with anything in there. But I was 24 at the time. And that's a lot to hear at a young age. But yeah, so I was brought into the maternity ward to recover, which I also thought was a little awkward. But I just had a private room in there, and I had to wait until about noon until they left me. They told me I could leave. So they kept checking my vitals, wrote me all the prescriptions that I would have to recover. Yeah, and my husband drove me to the pharmacy, got the prescriptions for pain, and we went home, and I just had to kind of take it easy for the next week, which was hard for me, but I think it kind of made me realize how good it is to rest sometimes. And yeah, so physically recovery was pretty easy for me. It was more of the mental recovery that was really hard, because like anytime I would feel any twinge in my body, anything that felt slightly off, I was convinced like it's happening again. I'm pregnant. I'm going to die. And it really took its toll on me for a while. I would be having a totally normal day, and out of the blue, I'd feel a tiny little pinch in my pelvic area. And I would think like, this is it. This is my other fallopian tube. So that was pretty hard. And it kind of went on for about 6 months or so, more than that, until I actually discovered fertility awareness about 6 months after that surgery. And I don't even remember, I think my best friend just mentioned it. And I was like, that's sort of interesting. And next thing you know, I'm throwing myself in books and podcasts and just I'm entirely obsessed. Yeah. And sorry, I'm rambling. Did you want to ask a question?
Well, you know what? Thank you for taking us through all of that. I mean, your story is so incredible, and there's just so many layers to it. I mean, you were just kind of living your life. Everything's fine. And all of a sudden you're in an emergency room. essentially having your fallopian tube taken out. And when you described your complete disbelief, and I could just imagine, because really birth control is something that you hadn't thought about for years. It was like the box was checked, it was taken care of, right? So you didn't have to think about it. And I think that's very interesting, because one of the things I always say is like, there's no birth control method that's entirely infallible. And it's interesting because I've never been in a situation where pregnancy was a complete like not possibility, I guess you could say, to the point that I would never have to think about it. Because if I've been tracking my cycles and not on any type of hormones or no IUDs or anything for nearly 20 years, like I'm always hyper aware of my fertile window and really hyper aware that I could get pregnant in any cycle, really.
Right.
And so it's very interesting just to imagine being in a place where you literally don't, like, it's so, the doctor's fully telling you that you're pregnant and it's like, no, I'm not. Like, I have this taken care of.
Right. And you know, like if a woman does want the copper IUD, I think that's fine. I think it can be a good option for many women if they learn how to observe and track their fertility signs. Because had I known about fertility awareness and had I been practicing it while I had the Paragard, I would have caught the high temperatures. I would have noticed that something was up. So, I mean, really, there's so many different options out there for you. And if you don't want to just go full on fertility awareness method, if you want to have something like the Paragard, I would highly, highly recommend still tracking and charting, just so you can find when there is a problem. And it's a little bit, I mean, it's just something that you should be taking seriously. It's sort of like if you have two of something in your body, then it feels like you have a backup, right? But now that I only have one tube, it feels pretty serious. Like if something happens to it, then I'm facing serious fertility issues. So it kind of was like a wake up call. Like I have to really be in tune with my body. I need to familiarize myself with my cycle. Like it is a vital sign, just like your upcoming book calls it. And like you've said on this podcast so many times, I want women to know all their options and the implications of all those options.
In your case, with your experience with the Paragard, I think it's really interesting to point out that your experience with the Paragard, it wasn't negative. You used it. How many years did you use it before you had this this unexpected pregnancy?
I think it was about a little over 3 full years.
Mm-hmm. So I feel like with having this conversation with you, Angie, it's not a conversation of like, you know, women shouldn't use the Paragard. That's not what this conversation is really. This conversation is more just, I mean, the Paragard did work for you for a long time. You didn't have any negative effects on it. And what's interesting from my perspective is that pregnancy is possible with any type of birth control. And that's even, you know, men have vasectomies, and there's like a tiny percent of men who then go on to like, you know, impregnate their wives. So it's like, or their partners. But I think that for me, it's interesting because like, yeah, like I think it's more of a reminder that if you're having sex with another human being, there's always a chance of pregnancy. And I think I suppose for me, something like the Paragard, I think that it's a good option in the sense that there's no hormones. I think that some women have negative experiences on it. Some women have amazing experiences on it. Some women do get pregnant using it. And I think all of those kind of effects you need to know about, because ultimately, I mean, with any birth control method, you could get pregnant. So I feel like in this case, we're not throwing the Paragard under the bus. You're just sharing what happened.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's plenty of women who aren't going to vibe with fertility awareness, but even if they can just learn to confirm that they're ovulating while they have the Paragard, that can potentially be a life-saving thing to know. And if you can just even at minimal, keep track of when your periods are coming, when you think you're ovulating, that'll be good for your health and for peace of mind. So I just think that any birth control can really be used in conjunction with FAM. And personally, right now, I only use FAM, and it's been this amazing experience for me. It's kind of funny how like losing a fallopian tube and, you know, a part of my body, it's like I traded that for gaining this immense awareness and appreciation and awe for my body. And I wouldn't really trade that for anything. For so much of my life, I felt like my body wasn't really a part of me. But right now it's like my womanhood is inextricably connected to my identity. And I really, truly know that FAM is what brought that to me. So
That's
it took a long
incredible.
road to get there, but it's really been great.
Well, it's so interesting because the way that we're not taught about our bodies leaves us in a place where we're really fearful of it. So feeling like we have to essentially check that box and take care of it with a permanent method, like a semi kind of like or a long-term birth control method, whether it's like taking the pill for years or other types of hormones, or even, IUD, whether it's hormonal or non-hormonal. What always scared me, so even back when I was like a teenager, late teens, trying to figure out what I was going to do for birth control, what scared me the most about using like any type of birth control method was not like being pregnant and not knowing I was pregnant. I think that scared me the most. So that aspect of your story really strikes a chord with me, because that's like my greatest fear, being pregnant and not knowing that I was pregnant.
Right. And I think a lot of it kind of comes back to control. Like we always want to control everything, but there becomes a point where you can be controlling your body too much by manipulating hormones or not ovulating. And so I think fertility awareness gives you a good balance where you can control when you have sex, or you can control kind of like your thoughts and your actions, but you're not manipulating your body to do things unnaturally, if that makes sense. And that's what's ignored by our medical paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Well, and even it's what you said, and it's so interesting because you're not in control of your body. Your body's going to do what it's going to do. And I feel like you're quite unique and, I would say rare, but I know that there is a percentage of women who do conceive on, using whether it's the copper IUD or the other, like it's almost like the dirty little secret that medicine doesn't want you to know, but there are failure rates. And if you, just join a Facebook group of women who've used IUDs and ask about pregnancy, really, I mean, there's tons of them. I'm not sure if you're part of any of them, but there are tons of now. And they get bigger and bigger. And so, some of these groups of actual women who have used a particular type of birth control method contain thousands and thousands of women. And so you can actually go in there and be like, hey, how many of you have ever, conceived using this method? And then all of a sudden you hear that. And so it's not to discourage anyone. Like, we all need birth control until we're ready to start our families. But I think, again, this is about having that conversation. Your doctor is not necessarily incentivized to tell you about all of the negative side effects or the possibility of pregnancy. Really, this conversation is often downplayed. And imagine if, just in general, if that had been kind of presented to you, like, it's really, really rare. The percentage is this small, and it's quite a small percentage. So if you ever experience like XYZ symptoms, though, then, you need to know that it's a possibility, because it could be really harmful. That simple sentence could have saved you a lot of pain.
Yeah. And I mean, what you said about them not having a lot of motivation to share with you all of these side effects, like there's a lot of financial incentives in there too for a lot of doctors, not all of them, but some of them are like, I've had friends who have been pressured by their OBGYNs to get certain types of birth control because they'll get kickbacks or whatever. So I think it's important to, first of all, your doctor, whatever kind of doctor it is, they do not know as much about your body as you do. It is your body, and trust your intuition. Trust yourself. I would also caution that you can find evidence for anything in any research. So like you were saying, if you go onto a Facebook group and ask people about their experience with IUDs, I mean, if you're going onto a fertility awareness group and asking that, you'll probably get a lot of information that's against IUDs. If you go somewhere else, you might find a lot of people in favor of IUDs. So you really have to be careful about where you're getting your information. And you want to find like a wide range of resources where you can see all the sides of something before you make a big decision about getting something inserted into your body or taking a pill every day. You just don't rely on just your one doctor's opinion. And if you, at least for me now, if I do see a male doctor, the whole experience kind of made me weary about it, since the first urgent care I went to had a male doctor who didn't test my urine, even though he had it for pregnancy. So now whenever I meet a male doctor, or really any doctor, I'm like, please always pregnancy test your women. Just do it.
Well, and it's interesting because, I mean, this goes back to something like in my interview with Tony Weschler years ago. And I believe, because it's hard because they kind of blend together, but I believe it was her that said, like, women are not Barbie dolls. Like, we're not just like here just as these things for male pleasure. And this whole conversation kind of alludes to that. There's this idea that we can just, do whatever we want with the female body and there's no consequences. And, when you track your cycles and when you are actually cycling, your body isn't disposable. Like you actually have to acknowledge that you can get pregnant any cycle, and it makes you into a human being that we have to actually, you know what I mean? Like think critically about how we're going to interact with it and ourselves. So to bring our conversation to a close, I mean, I feel like this has been a really balanced conversation. And at the end of the day, I think it's been positive in that, there's no one right birth control for every woman. There's certain types and methods of birth control that are going to be appropriate for certain parts of your life. And ultimately, the more information you have, the more informed your choices can be about it. So for a woman who's listening and maybe had her own experience with the Paragard or, any other type of birth control, either positive or negative, what would you want her to know?
Oh, gosh. Okay. A few things. One, I would be intentional about who you're choosing for your healthcare providers. I actually had an OBGYN a few months ago tell me that all women have 14-day luteal phases, even though mine is not that long. So yeah, being intentional about where you get your care, always trying to further educate yourself. So a lot of reading. Lisa's book, The Fifth Vital Sign, is already great. Taking charge here for fertility, women's body, women's wisdoms. There's just so many resources out there to keep on learning so that you can become more and more in tune with your body as you go on. And I guess also just sort of, this might sound a little esoteric, but just kind of trying to broaden, if you're interested in fertility awareness, I would also encourage you to kind of look at women's health as a whole. It's just, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, but like I'm a young white woman in a smaller body that doesn't have any disabilities. And I wonder sometimes if I had been a woman of color or if I had been in a fat body or had some disabilities, would they have taken my complaints seriously? Would I have had a more dire consequence? So kind of like check your privilege and know that if you go through a negative situation like I did, it could have been worse. So we need to kind of be allies to all the other women out there and work together to show our medical system what we want and what we demand. And I think we can hopefully move on from these 15-minute doctor's appointments where they leave you feeling worse than before and move on to something more holistic and appreciative of what women's bodies can do.
Well, I love that you said that. And I feel like it's kind of what you mentioned at the beginning of the podcast, being, you're 26, and this is an interesting time just in general for women because we're really starting to step into our power, speak out about all of these things, talk about our menstrual cycles because they're real and they're happening. And so there's a bit of a movement to really acknowledge and own these things. And with that comes basically a big responsibility on our shoulders to really advocate for the care that we need. So I appreciate that you said that. And I feel like that's a great message for the listeners as we kind of just navigate our way as women so that we really can lead the lives that we want without having to be worried about side effects or, all the different things that come with how we manage our fertility. So, Angie, I just want to thank you so much for being here today and for sharing your experience with us. I know your experience will, touch a lot of women. And I know that there's women who've had similar experiences and also women for whom, this kind of opened their eyes like, oh, yeah, right. Even if I use a copper IUD, like there's this tiny chance that I could get pregnant. And I think it's not to scare anybody, but it's actually a real thing. And I think we need to be able to talk about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Everybody keep talking, keep sharing experiences. We have a lot to learn from each other and a lot more to go.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/249. I hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Angie. Really powerful. I know having that conversation, for me, it was just really powerful. And I feel like it was a really important conversation to have. I mentioned this at the top of the episode, but I feel like it's time for us as women to kind of rebel against that medical tendency to not talk about this stuff, to say things like, well, the chance is so small that we don't even need to mention it, because there are real women for whom this happens to. And as I alluded to, for any woman who's, using IUDs or has thought about it or is curious about it, like if this conversation sparked curiosity, go, get thee to Facebook. Now, Facebook isn't the place where you're going to get, proper medical advice or anything like that. But if you find Facebook groups, if you've never looked at this, then you should. So there's a lot of different Facebook groups specifically that women are in for the purpose of like sharing information about IUDs. And so whether it's a copper IUD or whether it is the progestin releasing IUDs, if you have ever used one, if you are planning to use one, thinking about using one, contemplating it, or just curious or interested, join one of those Facebook groups and put in a question and just say, hey, has anyone ever had a pregnancy using the IUD? Has anyone ever had side effects? What did you experience? And just see what women say. Because again, this is what's missing from the conversation. We could talk about stats and X% of women experience this and that. But at the end of the day, these are real women who experience it. And so again, it's not about highlighting the worst case scenario and pretending every woman is going to experience the worst. It's just about having the conversation. Because at the end of the day, IUDs are a commitment. When you get them in, often they're intended to be in for several years. So some 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, some even 15 years. And with that said, this is something that I think it's just, again, it's literally always about, for me, it's always about informed consent and just having that heads up so that if you ever do have any concerns or issues down the line, that you know to connect A plus B, because that's what's missing. There's so many women who end up having side effects, and they go to their doctors even, and no one tells them it could be connected. And so these are real women. This is a real women's lives. And even for women who love the device and love what it does, for some of them, the effects are too great. And they, as much as they wanted to love it, it's just not right for them. Whereas for other women, it's great and it's perfect. It's a really good fit. And the effects are not, if there are any effects, they're not enough to prevent them from using it. So again, we're all on the spectrum somewhere, and we just need to be able to talk about this stuff. So I want to hear what you have to say if you've had a similar experience, or if you've used, IUDs before and you had a positive experience, had the complete opposite experience. I want to talk to you too. So make sure to join us in the Fertility Friday community. You can head over to fertilityfriday.com/community. I'll have a post in there now that today's episode has gone live, and we can talk about it, because I just like to hear what real women's experiences are. I mean, I think that's fairly obvious because I started this series, so many years ago. For more episodes in the Pill Reality series, make sure to check out fertilityfriday.com/pillreality. I don't know exactly how many episodes I have in there now, but it's over 10, I'm sure. And so this has been going on for a while. I just throw them in whenever whenever I'm able to connect with women and share experiences about birth control. But if this is your first Pill Reality series episode that you're listening to, or if you've only listened to a couple, I would suggest to go back and listen. So over the years, I've interviewed women, obviously, about the pill itself. I think the first several were basically about the pill and different experiences on the pill specifically. But over the years, it's expanded. So we've talked about the different types of hormonal birth control. We've talked about, I think I have a couple episodes coming up where we're talking about the implant, and really just to get a sense of the different types of birth control methods, women's experiences on them, and just to provide that space where we can actually talk about it. Because again, these are real women that it affects. So with that said, I want to thank you for spending some time with me today, for listening to the show, for being a part of the Fertility Friday community, for supporting the show. I really appreciate all of you for helping to spread the word about fertility awareness. And ultimately, if the education system isn't going to do it, then it's up to us. We're the ones that have to go out there and support other women. And we're really starting a movement. There is a movement happening. It's gotten a lot louder in the past couple of years, and I'm just thrilled to be a part of it. So with that said, enjoy the rest of your week, weekend, day, afternoon, morning, wherever we are. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.